I've worked as a correctional officer for a long time, and I've worked at facilities in Texas and Michigan. The oldest prison I've ever worked at just recently started to close in Michigan, and it got me thinking about all the paranormal experiences I've had there, and in the other prisons I worked at. I'd like to share with all of you some of the more notable paranormal experiences that I've had while working in these prisons. First off, I'd like to say that I have never really believed in ghosts before I started working as a correctional officer. I started off working in Texas at an intake facility and worked the night shifts, 12 hours a night from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. The first experience that I had was working on a lower security housing unit. When finishing a round, I was chatting with my partner, and I heard a loud banging sound. It was about 3 a.m. at that point, and no prisoners should be out of their bunks. I asked my partner if they knew what the banging was. Them being an older officer told me bluntly that the unit they were working was haunted. They told me the sound was coming from a door of one of the small quiet cells in the hallway, but not directly visible from the officer's station, and about how a prisoner had died in one. The prisoner allegedly died because the officers working there at the time had given them a sack of food when it was lunchtime, and the prisoner had choked on the food and died. I really didn't believe that the unit was haunted, so I decided to go look at this door. The sound volume increased as I got closer to the door. The door itself was visibly shaking, as if someone was pounding on it. There was nothing that could have been causing the door to shake like it was. I was at a loss for words. Later that night, I checked the door again, and there was steamed up handprints visible on the glass window of the doors. Another experience was at the same facility, but at a different housing unit. It was around 1 to 2 a.m., and I was sitting inside the officer's station watching the cameras and talking to my partner. I look at one of the cameras and clearly see a prisoner sitting at a table in the day room. I turn my head to look at the day room, and no one is sitting at the table I saw in the camera. I asked my partner to go check it out because no one is supposed to be out of bed yet. I rolled back the time on the camera to see if I could see where the prisoner might have gone. The prisoner on the camera just slowly fades away and vanishes completely. My partner comes back into the officer's station, and we both watch the video over and over. Later on that same night, during one of my rounds, I notice a wet floor sign that got left out. I return it to the porter closet. I get back to the officer's station and look back to where the porter closet is and see the same wet floor sign left out. I ask my partner if they are playing a joke on me or something because I just put the sign away. My partner denies doing anything with it. I go back out and make sure I put the sign back in the closet and lock the door. I get back to the officer's station, the wet floor sign right there in the open, again. My partner and I both watching this wet floor sign now. It starts to tip over on one end very slowly, 2 of its legs off the ground. The sign then slams itself to the ground. It then proceeds to slide quickly up the hallway and then back to the front of the closet door before ceasing all movement. My partner and I refused to come out of the officer's station for the rest of the night because we were scared out of our minds. One more notable one from Texas. I was working in an ADSEG unit, a really high security unit for prisoners that get in fights and cause a lot of problems repeatedly. We had a prisoner who was sitting in one of the closed observation cells. These cells are usually used for people who threaten harming themselves. In the summertime, prisoners will sometimes just say they are suicidal to be put in one of these cells because they are a lot cooler and are near the AC vents that the normal housing units don't have. The prisoner told me that this was what they were doing and that they didn't want to cause any problems. Later on that night, one of my partners and I were watching cameras, and all of a sudden, we see a shadow moving across the floor. Eventually, it carries to the close observation cell and disappears under the door. This is where it gets a little crazy. I do a round and check on the close observation cell. The prisoner is pacing in the cell. I ask the prisoner if they are okay, and the prisoner tells me that something didn't feel right, and that they are hearing voices that aren't there. I try to calm them down, and eventually, they do and lay on the bed. Later on, my partner calls for assistance because the prisoner had bit in the skin of their own wrist, causing them to bleed, held them above their head, and allegedly was speaking in tongues. When I started working in prisons in Michigan, I worked at a prison that was built back in 1877, one of the oldest prisons still operating in all the United States, and is now closing down. There were so many small experiences that I've had there. Doors would slam, you'd hear voices and get cold chills. The first really notable experience I had was around Christmas time on the third shift. I was working the oldest unit on the facility. Usually, we don't have prisoners there, but we had opened the unit to separate prisoners during the pandemic. I didn't have a partner due to how short-staffed we were, so one of the other officers set up a TV for me to keep me entertained because I'd be really far away from all other units and would get bored with no one to talk to. I do rounds for most of the night watching TV in between them. I suddenly hear a banging noise from a door that leads to a hallway that takes you all the way to an even older, unused, condemned part of the prison. I open the door and take a look down the hallway. A cold breeze hits me, and suddenly my arm hairs stand on end. I close the door, thoroughly creeped out. I go and sit down and start watching TV again. The TV starts flipping through channels rapidly and then stops on static. I have to get moved to a different unit because this scared the hell out of me. One day on third shift, my work friend and I were working at positions that allowed us to have a lot of free time and no prisoners to watch. We decided to explore the prison. We explored the tunnels that went underneath the prison, the old barns and the old unstaffed gun towers. We eventually decided to go look at the old condemned part of the prison from my earlier experience. There was a big metal gate that was about halfway down the hallway that had to be opened by a big skeleton key. We get back to the old condemned part, and my friend tells me about how this part was supposed to be the old segregation wing. We had to use flashlights to see because this section is so old, it had no power. The energy back there I won't ever forget. Just being there filled me with a feeling of dread. I asked my friend to head back, and we start to head back down where the hallway to the gate was. My friend's flashlight suddenly dies. We make it to the hallway, barely able to see anything, in the almost pitch blackness. We hear something running after us, so we start running up the hallway too. My friend fumbles with the key as we hear it getting closer and closer and closer. We get the gate open and sprint out of there. Later on, I noticed that my friend had red claw marks all over his arms. Well, that's all I got for all of you. I threw my sister a bachelorette party this past weekend at my house. I had been drinking all night, but was also hosting, so I made sure to have a good buzz, but not be overly intoxicated. My good friend, who doesn't drink, and I were sitting around the fire pit in the backyard around 11 p.m. to 12 a.m. From the backyard, you can see into the kitchen via a picture window facing the backyard, and then you can see in the dining room and living room via the sliding glass doors that lead onto the back deck. The girls were all leaving, and we could see everyone walking through the kitchen and saying bye to my sister. Once everyone left, my sister came outside and joined us for a few minutes by the fire. She then decided to go in and go to bed, and she started walking towards the house. My friend and I were watching her stumble back when something caught my eye in the kitchen window. I saw a male figure dressed in a white shirt walk through the kitchen. I thought it was my husband returning home from the hockey game and moved my gaze to the sliding doors to confirm who was in the kitchen. But no one came into view after it went through the kitchen. I thought I was seeing things until I heard my friend say, "What the?" And we both confirmed with each other that we saw the exact same thing. I know for a fact no one else was in the house. And if they were, we would have seen them walk into the dining room or walk back through the kitchen. I have a theory on who it might have been. My sister's fiance's best friend, who was supposed to be in the wedding, passed away in October of last year due to meningitis. I think he was making his rounds to the wedding activities. At least, it's comforting to think that instead of having a random ghost in my house. Anyway, thanks for hearing my story. I'm a 22-year-old female, and I've recently been getting more into spirituality because things in my life have always pointed towards this realm. Recently, my sibling and I have been discussing things we've experienced that seem to have no other reasoning but paranormal explanation, and these things have seemed to follow us throughout our lives. We have both experienced seeing figures or shadows move in our peripheral, and quite often hear scratching or knocking from windows with nobody on the other side. Now, I know this could be brushed off as the wind or maybe a cat on the roof, but there seems to be more to it. It followed us from different houses, but seems to interact the same way. Now that doesn't seem like much, but we did have a significant experience in the year 2021 that we haven't stopped thinking about since. Our family was staying in a family friend's cabin in the woods of North Florida. It was my dad, my uncle, and his 2 kids, my younger brother and his friend, my sibling, and I. It's important to keep in mind that this property is on 30 acres with no close neighbors. So the first night we got there, my uncle and his kids went to sleep shortly after, because it was late. While my dad stayed in the living room watching some show, my brother, his friend, my sibling, and I went out to the backyard to this big work shed on the property to play some pool and hang out for a bit. Everything is fine until it's reaching 2 a.m. We're talking and playing when we hear what sounds like metal scraping against the metal panels on the outside of the shed. We all hear it and stop talking for a minute, thinking at first it might just be an animal walking by. A few minutes pass as we're back in our conversation, then it happens again. We stop talking, the scraping stops. It's late, we're out there alone and it's pitch black outside the open door of the shed. So now, we're talking about how weird it is when the scraping then starts and turns into banging. At this point, we're all freaked out. My brother even suggests that it could be a person out there trying to mess with us. So he takes a pool stick and bangs on the wall near where the sound was coming from, and attempts to scare off whoever or whatever that was. Again, this noise stops for only a moment. Then the banging begins again. But this time, it starts to travel along the side of the wall heading towards the front door. After this starts, we're all freaked out. Whether it's a person or an animal, we didn't want to stay in there to find out. So we all grabbed our pool sticks and ran together outside and across the field between the shed and house. We didn't stop to look if anything was there. We ran straight in to find my dad completely knocked out on the couch, so we knew it wasn't him messing with us. We were all shook up from it, and then all four of us slept in the same room that night, with a light on and the door locked. Since this happened, my younger sibling swears that something followed us from that house and hasn't left us alone since. I'd like to mention that my sibling went here before this with my uncle, his wife, and their kids. They slept in one room and my sibling in the other. My sibling was already sketched out about this place, so they slept with the door to the bedroom locked. They went to bed with their phone plugged in on the floor next to the bed because their charger wouldn't reach the nightstand. When they woke up, their phone was propped up on the nightstand facing the bed. My sibling opens the phone, and it's on the camera, so they check the gallery to find a panoramic picture of the room, with them asleep in the bed, and a time-lapse video of them sleeping after the phone was propped up on the nightstand. The bedroom door was locked, and there was no way a person could have snuck in there without waking them up. I feel like I'm sort of rambling, but there's so much more that's happened in that past and continues to happen to us now. I don't know if we could maybe have someone do a reading for us to see if we have anything attached to us, or if there's a cleansing we could have done. But there has to be something we can do. I've even used a pendulum in attempts to communicate with whatever spirits are present, and I'm not sure if I should have or not. But what I got from it was there are more than 10 spirits present, and at least one of them has malevolent intention. I'm an anesthesiologist. I worked in the intensive care unit for 14 to 15 years. The event I'm going to tell happened in 2014 when I was working the intensive care unit in a private hospital in Izmir. We had a patient. Her name was Sabia. She was in the hospital because of the CRF and CHF diagnosis. She was 74 years old. Since there was no room in the general intensive care unit, she was staying in CVC, which was the cardiovascular surgery intensive care department. Our CVC intensive care unit had 3 beds. I was on my night watch. My only patient was Mrs. Sabia. The intensive care unit line rang around 2:45 a.m. The caller was the night supervisor. He told me that 2 women will come. Take them in and let them visit their Aunt Sabia. I told him, won't the nurse complain in the morning? It is forbidden to accept visitors at this hour. He replied, it's all on me. However, the doorbell rang. So I went and opened the door. And there were 2 women in their 20s at the door. I forgot how to speak when I saw them. They were so beautiful that I cannot describe them. I helped them to wear an apron and bonnet, but they were not speaking at all. I told them come in, and they entered. They went right next to the patient. They were not speaking again. but it was like they were communicating with their eyes. At that same moment, the night supervisor entered and sat next to me. I was still watching them. I told the man next to me, "Brother, what a beautiful couple of women." One of the women looked at me and smiled. Then one of the women took something around her chest area and put it in the mouth of the patient. I suddenly stood up and yelled, "What are you doing?" Both of them started to scream, and I think they were afraid. The night supervisor got mad at me and told me, "Leave them alone." I said, "Brother, don't you see? They stuck something in her mouth." He replied, "Don't worry." The women left, and I was curious. I went and opened the mouth of Mrs. Sabia. I saw 3 strings of hair in her mouth. I took them and threw them away. I asked her, "Who were they? Do you know them?" She replied, "Who? I didn't see anyone." I said, "Are you sure? 2 women came next to you for a minute ago." She replied, "No, my son, no one came." And this put stress on me. I called one of the nurses from another floor and I told her, "I will take a 10-minute break." I went out and started to smoke in front of the emergency unit entrance. Meanwhile, the night supervisor came. I told him, "Brother, you put me in trouble this night." He replied, "What are you talking about? I don't understand it." I said, "Brother, you sent 2 women to CVC as the relatives of that patient and told me to take them in, and then you also visited me." He said, "No, I didn't come and send anyone to you. What are you talking about?" I said, "Brother, you called me and said 2 women will come for a visit, let them in, and then you came and sat next to me." He was really getting mad as I spoke, and he said, "I've been sleeping in the doctor's room in the emergency unit for 3 hours. What are you talking about? It doesn't make any sense." I said, "Okay, brother, never mind," and went back. I entered the intensive care unit and sat down. I was about to get mad, then the night supervisor came in again. He told me, "What just happened? Tell me." I told him what happened and he told me, "Come, let's check the security camera footage." We called security and visited the room. We checked the footage. I see myself helping someone wearing the apron and even tying it, but those 2 women were not on the screen. It all looks like I'm doing everything on my own. After 5 minutes of footage, the door opens on its own. I said, "Look, here you are entering the unit, but you are invisible right now." Anyway, my shift ended in the morning, but I didn't go to my home. At noon, patient relatives are accepted. I waited for them, especially the relatives of Mrs. Sabia. At noon, her relative came, and her son and his spouse. I spoke to them before they entered and talked about what happened. 2 of them started to laugh and said, "This is not the first. They have tried plenty of times before." I replied, "How? Brother, I didn't understand." He said, "My mother has land and fields in the village. My stepmother is trying every possible way to get these lands and fields. Spells, amulets, hauntings. She tried all the dirty work. This should be one of them. However, thank God you got rid of them all. Do not be afraid, just get used to it." I told him, "How can I get used to this? I can't deal with such things while working." We went to the chief physician with the night supervisor and explained the situation, and they transferred her to another hospital. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please give a like, leave a comment, and subscribe. Perhaps click the bell for notifications, and remember, hell is empty, and the devils are here.